So in our studies of philosophy, we studied ancient philosophy. Those were the philosophers of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. After that would ordinarily come medieval philosophy. And then after medieval philosophy, we have another category of philosophy we call modern philosophy. So of course, the question is, what is modern philosophy? And how do we distinguish modern philosophy from, say, medieval philosophy, the era that preceded it? Typically, we date modern philosophy to the likes of Descartes in France and Francis Bacon in England. And modern simply implies that there's a break with medieval. In the same way that we had medieval history, then Reformation history, then modern history, in philosophy we have medieval philosophy followed by modern philosophy. What was happening during this time? A lot of this is a review from our last course, which was a course in modern church history. At that time we saw the rise of nation states and nationalism, which simply meant that we were starting to think of ourselves as French or German or English or Spanish, rather than by the other groups by which we previously identified ourselves. We had the rise of the middle class. What was the French word that we used for the middle class? The bourgeoisie. So we had the rise of the middle class. It was no longer aristocrats and the poor. Now there were those people who started employing the poor in different ways and were amassing wealth. We had various scientific discoveries that were occurring at that time, especially in astronomy with the likes of Kepler, his heliocentric theory, how it is that the sun is in the center and we revolve around the sun. Craziness, right? The likes of Galileo, who suggested that the earth moves. And then we had the Reformation, which of course was part of our last course of church history, which really shattered our unity, the unity of Christendom. Remember that our religion we called Christianity, but the way that we united ourselves and created structures around that we referred to as Christendom. How it was that all of us who shared a religion also came together around an emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor in that case. So how is modern philosophy going to be different from the preceding era, which was medieval philosophy? Medieval philosophy was written in a common language, the language of the church. That was Latin at that time. How many of us write in Latin today? Not so many of us. What do we write in? We write in the vernacular, simply meaning our mother tongue. Same in modern philosophy. No longer are we going to be studying this language Latin, but instead we're going to be writing in our own languages. So if you're French, you'll be writing in French. If you're English, English. Germans in German, etc. The medievals, if we were to think back to people like St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Bonaventure, a lot of them, they were not coming up with new ideas. They would take the same works and they would simply write their commentaries on those works. So that, for instance, one of the great texts that they would commentate on was Peter Lombard's sentences. And so everyone came up with his or her own commentary on the sentences. That was in the Middle Ages. We all commented on other works, not in the modern. In modern philosophy, we're going to be coming up with our own works. Why should we be looking to those past authorities? Instead, we're going to be thinking our own thoughts. Many medievals were university professors. Think of people like St. Bonaventure and St. Thomas Aquinas. They taught in universities, in that case the University of Paris. In modern philosophy, very few of them are going to be professors. In fact, many of them are going to refuse professorships. They're going to be offered the chair of philosophy at certain universities, and they're going to say, no thanks, I prefer to be free from all of that, to be a free thinker. Medievals focused more on God, and as we suggested in our last course, the focus is going to be less on God in the modern era and more on nature. How it is that there are certain laws of nature that seem to rule this world, things that we can all agree on, and when we start talking about God and revelation, suddenly there's not so much agreement. In fact, in our last course, we saw all the wars and all the killing that happened as a result of our religious beliefs. It's time for us to jettison those beliefs and to see what it is that we all have in common. We all live in this natural world. Let's focus more on ourselves as human beings and this world that we live in. We'll still talk about God in this course, but it would be in the context of who we are as human beings in this world. Descartes, so in medieval philosophy we talked about scholastic theology. Do you remember that? Scholastic theology was dated back to St. Thomas of Aquinas, who lived from 1225 to 1274, which incidentally was the year in which we created purgatory, the Second Council of Lyon. So scholastic theology, with the Counter-Reformation, the Council of Trent, remember from the last course, with the Council of Trent, we would come up with uniformity in the church, which is why we had seminaries. So that out of every seminary, we could crank the same product, the same sort of seminary, and the same sort of priest, celebrating Mass in the same way throughout the world. Emphasis on uniformity. That was scholastic theologians. With the Council of Trent then, which ended in 1563, what we would see then is that theology was the church's theology for the next 400 years. So any priest who was ordained before the 1960s was steeped in scholastic theology. Our first French modern philosopher, Descartes, had a problem with scholastic theology and scholastic philosophy. Why? He said it only expounded on truths already known rather than focus on new discoveries. Think about that for a moment. Here we are living in this world in which we're discovering things all the time. All of these great discoveries, Galileo suggesting that the earth is moving, Kepler suggesting that the sun is in the middle of the earth. We're discovering so many things about this world. We discovered new continents. And yet, when it comes to our theology and our philosophy, there's nothing new. Does anyone see the disconnect there? So Descartes had a problem with that, and was suggesting that there are now new truths, there are new inventions, there are new discoveries all the time, how it is that this sense of the new might affect our philosophy as well. Back before this era, about this time, we're going to start referring to them as scientists and as science. Before then, science, as we know it today, was simply a branch of philosophy. We referred to it as natural philosophy. So do you remember back to ancient philosophy? That guy named Aristotle? Aristotle, in his work on categories, he came up with all sorts of, he's taking a look at all the animals and plants of the world and trying to categorize them. He was essentially an early scientist, but we didn't call it science back then. Back then it was a branch of philosophy. We called it natural philosophy. Now, with these new discoveries, we're going to call it science. And we see for the first time scientists, physicists, astronomers, chemists. These sciences are going to be arising during this time. So now that physical science or natural philosophy, it was distinguished from philosophy, but now these scientists are going to be making all sorts of discoveries, and they're going to be thinking about our world in a way that we didn't think about it before. Do you remember when we talked last class about the deists? They had this image of God being sort of like a clockmaker. That's how we're going to be thinking more and more about the world during this time of modern philosophy. It's less about God making the world in 7 days, more it is that how it is that God made the world with certain laws, sort of like winding up the clock, and then letting it go. And all the laws of this world continue to work. The world continues to spin on its axis, the earth going around the sun. All of these laws just continue. Once God set them in motion, they continue. So it was a very mechanistic worldview, which simply means that we saw the world as a machine. Think about it for a moment. Isn't it true that the same things repeat every single day? For instance, with the sun coming up, going across the sky, and the sun setting, right? I'll be willing to bet that tomorrow, should the good Lord give us life and breath, what will happen is in the morning the sun will come up. We'll go across the sky and we'll set. In fact, I bet that we could determine the hour that the sun will come up and the hour that the sun is going to set. Right? Because we know the laws of nature. It was a full moon a few nights ago. I have a feeling that we can tell, I can tell you exactly when the next full moon is going to be. Okay, maybe I don't know right offhand, but there are certain laws that these bodies are following. It's like a big machine.
Very doctor Ed.
It's like a big machine. All we have to do is start documenting. Okay, when's the first full moon? Okay, we're going to keep track of it. And the next full moon comes around. Wait a minute, did you ever notice that it's like a machine? It just keeps repeating itself the same number of days. A year. Did you ever notice that a year keeps repeating itself with the same number of days? So we have this mechanistic worldview which starts to make us question things like spiritual things. We can see the sun coming up every day and setting every day. When's the last time you saw your soul? There are certain spiritual realities. Okay, you talk about angels or demons. Have you ever seen any of these lately? Okay. We start focusing then on those things that we can all agree on. Angels, that's a nice concept. Someone had a nice idea of angels, but let's relegate to that to personal revelation. If an angel came to you and spoke to you, I'm happy for you, but that doesn't necessarily impact us. Your personal revelation from God or one of the saints or angels or whatever, personal revelation is no longer part of our public discourse. We're going to talk about those things that all of us can agree on. And when you go home tonight and have your visions of whomever telling you to do whatever, that's your business. So in this mechanistic world, we're going to focus on what it is that we can see and touch and taste and smell and feel, those things that we get through our senses, those things that we can all agree on, and those things that are of the spiritual world, we're going to start questioning those a little more. So the view in this mechanistic worldview is that all bodies are machines. Think about it for a moment. Isn't your body sort of like a machine? And when the batteries wear down at night, what happens? You have to go to bed. You have to go to sleep tonight. Why do you have to go to sleep tonight? I have a feeling that your body is like a machine and it has to recharge itself. Interesting. When we take a break, we're going to get some food to eat and something to drink. Interesting. Why do you eat and why do you drink things? Well, I have a feeling that your body's like a machine. It's like your car. And when the gas level gets low in your car, it's time to fill up again. Same with the body too. You have to nourish the body for it to keep going. Interesting, this mechanistic view of ourselves and of our world. But then the question becomes, are we purely material beings, or is there some spiritual thing? And as we'll see in a moment with Descartes, Descartes is going to say, yes, there is this thing that's not purely material. But we're going to talk about that a little more, because we have to figure out, okay, there's this spiritual world, there's this material world. I am not purely physical. So what is this I that's not part of my physical body? That seems to be inside my physical body. I seem to be inside this body that I inhabit. Have you ever thought about that for yourself? You have a body, but that body is not you. There's something inside that body that is you. You are somehow inside that body, driving that body like I drive my car. Like a pilot within a ship, said the philosophers. You're inside your body. So in the meantime, philosophers are going to be wrestling with, what is this? What's the relationship of this body that I'm inside and this spirit, because it seems that I'm more than just a body. So we have to figure out, what's this relationship between the body and the soul, or the body and the spirit, or the body and the mind, whatever concept you want to use, spirit, soul, mind. There's something about us that's not purely material. Descartes couldn't explain that relationship, as we'll see in a moment. Other philosophers are going to try to explain it in different ways. For Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes over in England, it was easy because for him, there was no spiritual world. We're machines, people. Can you not see that your brain functions in a certain way, and that creates you to be the human machine that you are? So for Hobbes, it was easy because there was no spiritual component. We're all like any other animal. I mean, we are essentially machines. God made us in a certain way, and we continue to act in that way. So that was Hobbes rejecting the spiritual. And if we do that, then essentially we're no longer free. We're like dogs or any other animal that's driven by the way it's wired. When a dog is hungry, it finds something to eat. And when a dog is cornered into a corner, what happens? It reacts in the way that dogs are wired to react. Interesting. Could we as human beings have more in common with dogs and other animals?